Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. That's a good welcome. Sit down. I think you're popular here.
I noticed that the approval rating of Congress is now at 5%, so I'm really glad to see part of that 5% here this morning. We're down to paid staffers and blood relatives, so I want to thank all my staff who's out there.
Okay, so John, let's talk about the current insanity in Washington. How did we get to a place, frankly, yesterday where Congress had to be guilt-tripped in passing the resolution to, to give money now to the death benefits for the families of the fallen? I mean, how do we get to such a place where we're having to do this?
Well, there's a polarization in American politics today that I haven't seen in the years that I've been here. Part of it has to do with the redistricting. Many members of Congress are in virtually lifetime seats because of the way that happens. There's the outside influence of outside money. I think the worst decision of maybe Dred Scott, but others of the United States Supreme Court was Citizens versus United, which reversed the McCain-Feingold law. I think there is an attitude probably amongst particularly the base of our party that is unhappy with the status quo, and that is always exacerbated by bad economic times. So I think it's a confluence of factors which has led to, I brought with me this morning the Gallup poll. In case you've missed it this morning, we are here at a historic moment, at least in their polling, because the approval rating of Republicans is 28%, all-time low since Gallup has been taking polls since 1992. They've been asking this question. And the death benefits thing drove me to go to the floor of the Senate, as you probably know, a couple of days ago. But let me also give you another example of what this is doing. The Grand Canyon, which is one of the crown jewels of our national parks, we have obviously hotels, restaurants, facilities that are run by concessionaires, contract with the Park Service and operate there. They have a couple of thousand employees up there. They're not federal employees. They're just employees of people who have contracts. And we're literally having to bring food to the Grand Canyon to feed these people who are out of work and out of money.
Well, it's so insanely
it's so
crazy. Absolutely crazy. Well, I mean, today we saw in the Times that, that the business people now are kind of rebelling. I mean, they're actually saying, why did we do this to ourselves? I mean, they were the people, a lot of these big business people who actually helped to fund redistricting and so on, and they're now beginning to regret it. Do you think this could be a pivotal point in actually getting through when the big money really starts to say, you guys are nuts?
I think the business community, and I'm hearing from business people, large and small, that are tired of this. They're being hurt very badly. Small businesses, in a way, are because they live more on the margins, and big business and corporations are hurting very badly. And then if we obviously default on the debt, there are some colleagues of mine who believe we have enough money to keep the government going and all that. But what I think they are not appreciating is the signal that we send to the world. Whether, the Chinese own $1 trillion of our debt, our securities, and if we send that signal, then I think you're going to see the markets act, and then I think it's going to force us to act. The question is why should we put the American people through this? Why should we do this? Everybody knows what the answer is here. We sit down, we do something about the medical device tax, which is most everybody is unalterably opposed to. We probably do something to make sure that members of Congress are subject to the same health care provisions under Obamacare that other Americans are. Maybe a couple of other small things, and get going again. And unfortunately, we are driven to some degree by I'll be very frank with you, some incumbent Republicans fear of a Tea Party primary.
Well, I know we see that, but I mean, isn't really the big question now? I mean, the story of this political crisis is really the culpability not just of the Republican crazies, but of the Republican non-crazies. I mean, how do we get to the point where Mitch McConnell is Rand Paul's bitch? I hate to use that word, but I mean, it's like, where's the heroism in your own party? I mean, why aren't the moderate Republicans, fighting back? We're always saying, why don't the moderate Muslims fight jihad? But, this is jihad.
I think he is, but I'd also like to point out that the president, as opposed to, excuse me, I hate this device.
It was that word, I think, that I uttered. It made the phone ring.
The president's making a mistake too, my friends, and that is that in '95, when we shut down the government, there was round the clock, literally, negotiations with Bob Dole and Newt Gingrich and the president, and they talked and they negotiated, and whether they reached any agreement or not, at least there was the effort being made. And I think the president, up until about yesterday, is by saying, I won't negotiate under any circumstances, is making a mistake too. The polling data that I was mentioning also shows a decline in the president's approval rating and the Democrats' approval rating. It just isn't as steep as the one for the Republicans. And people are sick and tired of it. I ran through Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport the other day, and a guy ran up to me and said, hey, anybody ever tell you look a lot like Senator John McCain? And I said, yeah. He said, doesn't it sometimes just make you mad as hell? There's no doubt that and what we're doing, Tina, long term, is we're really shaking people's confidence in government. And if that's the case, that has really long-term implications, because I still think, as Churchill said, it's the worst of all, but a better one hasn't been invented. And I really seriously, I would joke about it, but I really worry a lot about it, because I think it's an honorable profession. And I think that there's so many good men and women who are serving. But we're now in a situation which, one of the differences between '95 and now was it was Bob Dole and Newt Gingrich with President Clinton. Now it's John Boehner and his conference and the President of the United States. So it's a three-cornered deal, which makes it much harder to come to an agreement than it did back then. And
well, I mean, you called, frankly, the Tea Party radical element, and Paul and Cruz, you did make the celebrated wacko birds comment. I was actually rather crushed when you then apologized and kind of walked it back. Do you see, though, a real pressure coming from inside your party towards that element?
Well, first of all, I apologized because I don't like to get personal in these issues. I was very frustrated on the floor. And I've found over the years that you should do combat with people and fight as hard as you can, but never get personal. And I have made a mistake from time to time of doing that. My favorite, one time Ted Kennedy and I were on the floor, and there was a freshman Democrat, freshman Republican, got into an argument about some parliamentary procedure. Ted came over and started yelling at the freshman Republican, so I came over and started yelling at Ted, and we were nose to nose yelling at each other. The two freshmen left the floor. They were so intimidated by this scene, and after it was over, Ted and I were walking out, and he put his arm around me and said, we did pretty good, didn't we? That's the kind of thing we need to do in politics. I've ever seen Republican senators running ads, never seen that in my life. And I think that is terribly, there's Kansas, Pat Roberts, the other day, announced that he was going to run against We can sit down together, agenda for the American people. Only know what we're against and not what we're for. But look, we've been through bad times. Of Ronald Reagan and people's ability to pick and choose.
Now, I was though kind of fascinated in post chamber effect, and I wonder whether you think that this kind of closed listen to their own side is actually affecting things in a very pernicious that they lost. They didn't seem to understand, the empirical evidence in the polls and so on, because they were only listening to their own side. Do you think that?
Because and Walter Cronkite was a person in America, and deservedly so. I think the long run now, someone
Okay, let's get back to the military. Very much sort of focused on that. I mean, this disconnect between
was a good thing, but I can't take someone, an accomplished professional, with the equipment and the it really takes a long time to adequately train a woman in the military. So from a practical standpoint, but I would like to point out that my generation, when they came back, and fought for a year in Vietnam. And one of the reasons now we honor, as you are today, now we honor the men and women who raised them. Attracted the best and the brightest from America, certainly. For another day. Government.
Yeah.
And
how
I've
do you,
made
how
some
do you
pretty
see,
bad ones.
and how do you see that playing out actually? In what is going to be that real damage that you see done by DC?
The most is that, as I mentioned, we have attracted the best and the brightest. Our officer corps and senior enlisted are right now, they're saying They can't train, they can't equip. And the real use. And if we're having already an exodus, which will grow, staying in the military. That's what bothers me so much. Exchanges I've had with men and women, and you do a lot of things, but you.
So we're now saying that this crisis has, damaged the military. It has, damaged military readiness. It has impacted. Should debt ceiling nightmare right now for the sake of the military in this country, for the sake of those who serve? I mean, should we not be saying that?
In the military, it's a sequestration. Yeah. And by the way, in our weapon systems, which are a disgrace. But Gerald, to do with $2 billion that we just wasted. 35 is one of the most we've got to clean up our act in the Pentagon and in our acquisition process for their dollar. A legitimate cost to buy these weapon systems without these. That they're.
I mean,
Could I just mention since a couple. A lot of talent to get shot down. I was able to intercept a surface-to-air missile with my own airplane. But I would just like to mention two of mine. One was a guy named Bud Day, a friend of mine, close friend and beloved friend, who was, up until he died a couple of months ago, the most. And if it had not been for his leadership, I would have been capable of doing the things that I did. Near Eglin Air Force Base. My other genuine hero, and still my enduring moment and time for me that I have never ever forgotten. I think to all of us who, in times that are very difficult, will stand up for what we believe in. And I think because of her, Burma now has a chance to be a nation that enjoys.
The kind of the brave step to kind of stand at us. And how can she respond now? I mean, she's got to step down from her pedestal and become. Can she retain her, iconic status, and how does that play out?
and just watch was not Aung San Suu Kyi. And she's very, very compromises and some things she's going to have to do, which may, that you just stated, including the Buddhist, including the minorities, including other aspects, and the pervasive back and watch things happen without her involvement. She still is.
Yourself experienced, I mean, you know, mix of, you know, being in politics, and you've had, you know, you've seen, as we talk backstage, you've seen many
She may not be perfect, but in my eyes, she is.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Let's talk about what's happening in the turbulence of the Middle East. Today, of course, we saw last night that the Syrian Prime Minister was captured. The Libyan Prime Minister was captured. We're now seeing that Libya really is sort of overrun by warring militias. How do you see Libya playing out? You were such a spokesman for interventionism there. It's not going well, let's face it. In them more, and yet we can't afford.
First of all, that was selling, he was a college graduate, he had no job, he was selling vegetables. And he then poured gasoline on himself and burned himself to death, and that lit a fire. Including spreading to Libya, including to Syria. And we intervened, and our allies intervened with air power, which was the best way to do it without any boots on the ground, and Gaddafi obviously departed. And so at that time, Lindsey Graham and Joe Lieberman and I wrote a piece that was in the Wall Street Journal saying, here's what we have to do. Help them with securing the weapons caches, help them with border security, had to do, because this transition has made a history of totalitarian, left the whole dramatically. This did not go in and help there's these wounded. Secretary Panetta, who I admire greatly, came back to me a couple of weeks later and said, well, it would take 5 weeks to get there. And I said, it took Columbus less time than. And now we see this situation in a crisis, and these militias, as you say, leadership, we would people, as with the Egyptian people, the Libyan people who are not Islamists. They may be of the Muslim. Think that we should have done a lot more.
aid there today.
I have a cordial relationship with the president. Too much at stake here for me to be partisan in dealing with the president of the United States. But having said that, when I watch some of these things happen, it just, well, we had a law, and we have a law on the books that says if there is a coup, then aid is cut off. So when a coup took place, and you can't view it any other way, Lindsey Graham and I said, look, it's a coup. Cut off the aid, say we will restore the aid just as soon as you have a schedule for a new constitution, new elections, et cetera, and go on the path to democracy. Instead, the administration hands off. Well, we're going to suspend some aid. Well, now yesterday, we're going to suspend some aid, but not other aid. What is the message? What is the message to Mr. General Sisi, who, by the way, Lindsey and I had a very spirited conversation with in Cairo, but what's the message to them? The message to them is, we have the rule of law and we abide by it. They should have the rule of law, and until they do, we're going to abide by our rule of law. And we didn't do that. And so now what's the message to Sisi? I promise you that you will see, if they keep on the path that they're going, because of the Arab Spring, that you will see an insurgency in Egypt and terrorism, because they're not able today to keep people down, because there's too much of these kinds of devices that spread information. Information is knowledge. And this is so important, because I don't have to tell anybody here, Egypt is the heart and soul of the Arab world. And now we are seeing virulent anti-Americanism, by the way. Treatment of our ambassador, Ann Patterson, was just disgraceful. And the situation, I'm afraid, will deteriorate more. I had no brief from Mr. Morsi. Mr. Morsi mishandled his presidency to a terrible degree. But they had elections already scheduled for this November. And now I see pictures all over Egypt, posters of General Sisi with the dark glasses on. I used to see pictures many years ago, a general with dark glasses on, and his name was Nasser. And I'm afraid we may be seeing a return to that kind of government, but it won't work now.
So do you think that we're now seeing,
changed.
I'm so sorry, do you now feel that Obama is becoming, he was the president who talked about, bringing us closer together in a sense with the Middle East. Do you think that he's now being seen as the person who's supporting despots? I mean, we're now doing a deal with Assad. You're seeing the posters of the despots in dark glasses. I mean, is this where, do you think he's blown that message?
I think that the President of the United States, understandably, ran for president against what had taken place in the previous 10 years. Americans war weary. I fully understand and appreciate that. And when you look at the president's speech in Cairo in 2009 and look at the Arab world today, it's just, it's almost incoherent. So we got out of Iraq without leaving a residual force. And I won't go into all the details, but we certainly could have. Now Iraq is unraveling terribly. We're now seeing a resurgence of Al-Qaeda. We did not assist this Free Syrian Army. And, well, once we gave them a whole bunch of MREs. MREs don't do very well against tanks. And we have now seen, about a year ago, the momentum was on the side of the Free Syrian Army. Then 5,000 Hezbollah came in. The Russians dramatically increased their flow of weapons. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard are training thousands of Syrians and bringing them back into Syria, and it's an unfair fight. There's 1 million children who are refugees now. 110,000 are killed. And where our focus is on the 1,400 who were killed, while the weapons continue to flow in from Russia and from Iran, and killing Syrian people. I can't tell you how demoralized the Free Syrian Army are, and that's why some of them are now moving over into the radical Islamic camp, because they think that they have been abandoned. Just one vignette. I was in a refugee camp in Jordan. There was only like 50,000 people there then, and I was being escorted around by a woman who is a school teacher, and there's children everywhere. And she said, "Senator McCain, you see all these children?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "They're going to take revenge on those people that they believe abandoned them and refused to help them." Do you know what happened in the Palestinian refugee camps, my friends? We bred extremism, and we're sowing the wind, and we're going to reap the whirlwind. And so
we are where we are, though, now.
We are where we are.
So what do we do now? What do we do now with Syria?
We can still give more help to the Free Syrian Army. We can.
Are you confident, though, now that helping the Free Syrian Army, that we're not
just giving them some more help, finally. But one of the bad news is that there are very wealthy Saudis and Qatars that are getting, and a network that goes all the way to South Africa, that is getting arms and equipment and help to the bad guys, to al-Nusra and the other extremist groups. And they are good fighters. They're not afraid to die. And so 2 years ago, there was no of these extremists. And by the way, they're from all over the world. They're not just from the Arab world. And now we have an increasing number of them flowing in from all over the world, from France, from countries in Europe. And so we can turn it around. We can still succeed. The Syrian people will not be governed by a bunch of extremists from outside their country. That's just not a possibility. But we can still turn this around, and I'm not positive that we can, but to give up on it now, I think would be, and remember, this is not just a conflict in Syria. This is now a regional conflict. It has spread to Lebanon. It has spread. The king of Jordan has said he cannot stay in power. 20% of the population of Jordan is refugees. Think of what 20% of our population would be, the United States of America would be like. And Lebanon is being destabilized. The Iranians are all in. The Russians are in. The Saudis are in. The Qatars are in. This is now expanding into a regional conflict, which cannot be in the interest of the United States to see this thing continue to spread. And so we've got to realize this started out as a civil kind of conflict, and now it is spread into a very big power game. And those of us who study history might remember the Spanish Civil War back in the 1930s and the implications that happened then. And we also might remember that in the 1930s, we sat by and watched things happen that we later paid a very heavy price for.
Steps. I mean, you're seeing in each of these, seeing missteps, but you're seeing
later gave the negotiators how you say trust but verify. And then we will negotiate as to what kind of nuclear capabilities have hurt them. Just a stalling tactic while they not retracted their. What the Israelis worry about is they get right next to the no matter where they are in the political or the even more than it is today.
Senator
By the way,
McCain,
it's not
we're
an
gonna have
accident.
to-
We could just say it's not an North Korean young beyond. It's not an accident that they all over the world, and if we don't lead, somebody else will. Karzai is now.
I'll be right there. To lead, that's a great place to end. Thank you very much.
Thank
Senator
you.
McCain.